Hey guys, I am Ibigandscary. I'm bringing you another StarCraft 2 replay, this time featuring in our bottom left-hand side, Hordeon, our blue Masters, High Masters, Zerg, and his opponent is StatiC, our red Protoss. We are on Daybreak, and this is my favorite feature about this new UI that Blizzard put out there. I guess Team Liquid is the one who put it out there. But adding the name of the map, man, I have a short attention span. I've got a very, very, very poor short-term memory, and the name of all the maps pretty much escaped me immediately with the exception of Ohana, and I guess Daybreak. Daybreak is pretty well known. It's on the larger side of maps where you can get away with things like Forge Fast Expand if you're Protoss, and it's super safe. Super safe whenever you're on Daybreak. Hordeon is beginning to probe up. We're at that 10 supply mark, but with the production of that Overlord, it doesn't look like he's going to be trying for any sort of shenanigans with the 10 pool. Not going to be trying to deny the expansion coming out of StatiC. Been casting a lot of games from Hordeon lately. He gave me like 6 or 7 of his replays, and I looked through, I want to say all of them. And every single one was fantastic, so I decided to cast them all. So forgive me if you're getting used to seeing his playstyle. I like studying a specific person at a specific time. I play Zerg also, so it's really, really fun whenever you're watching somebody who pretty much belongs in Grandmasters. I know I say he's in High Masters because at the time of the creation of these replays, that's where he was. Lord knows where he is now. They've probably created a new league for him. There goes the spawning pool. StatiC is absolutely loving seeing that because of all that money he saved up. He failed to throw down the Forge on his way out of the front door, so that means he's going to be going for a Nexus first. Very ballsy build indeed, and it's nice whenever you arrive with your probe and you see that the spawning pool has not gone up, and you don't have to worry too much about a super early rush or anything like that. 5 hit points left, but with the shields recharging, it looks like StatiC's going to stick around just long enough to harass the drone coming out of Hordeon, even though he's got the money. Can't really throw down the hatchery with that probe there, but he manages to sneak it in otherwise. A very, very cool play. The spawning pool is going to be finishing just as that hatchery goes down, as well as the Nexus. StatiC throwing down immediately thereafter the Forge. So both players are gearing up for a little bit more of a macro-style game. 17 Harvesters over 15, but we're going to see that number kind of stabilize as soon as Hordeon gets up his hatchery, and it's going to be up a couple seconds before the Nexus, as well as that first Queen. It's probably going to be waddling down to the second hatchery in a relatively short amount of time. We're going to have plenty extra larvae to kind of equalize the drone count. Cybernetic score, no, that's a gateway because the gateway hasn't been built yet. Can't get a cybernetic score up without a gateway. Gateway being constructed right beside the Forge, probably going to complete that wall off, maybe with the cybernetic score. You don't know. He's got a pylon over here. He's probably going to have a pylon up in his main base in a relatively short amount of time, checking out just the little corners of his map, just to make sure that there's nothing untoward going on from Hordeon. But Hordeon, content with the knowledge that his opponent is on 2 base, is going to switch it up to 3rd. And again, you can see that those numbers have kind of equalized now, 19 over 18, and that's just only going to be more and more heavily in the favor of Hordeon as this game goes on, because he's going to have, 1 extra hatchery, 1 extra queen, 1 extra spawning location for all of his drones. Double gas coming up for StatiC, so it's going to be neat. What is he going to do with that extra gas? Well, he's got the Forge up, so he could be working on the 1-ups in a relatively short amount of time. You definitely want to get that +1 weapon so that the Zealots can 2-shot those Zerglings. Super, super important in the later matchups, as well as the initial protection. But with that wall off pretty much complete, with the photon cannon there and the probe, even though it's one shot away from death, he is kind of securing the front door. So that's pretty neat to see. Once that Zealot comes out, he's not going to have an issue with closing that front door. Indeed, he's got the rally point already queued up there. It's pretty neat to see another probe going out just for the scouting. Did he manage to get all the way into the 3rd to see it? He did, just barely. And you know what? He also just barely survives, making his way in there as soon as the Zealot spawns. Both of the probes pulled back immediately. StatiC really on point with all of his micro, immediately producing another sentry, a first sentry rather, which is a great decision. I love getting out sentries early on in the game. It, number 1, helps you spin down some of that extra gas. Another sentry on the production pad. No, that's just the first sentry. What did he spend all that money on? A robotics facility. Awesome. Even better. With the production of a sentry and a robotics facility and a Zealot, obviously you think immediately about that Zealot Immortal all-in strategy that was so very much in vogue a couple of months ago. However, it's definitely fallen on the wayside with all the different weapons that Zerg has now. The meta game is just kind of shifted. I would love to see a revival of that because it was incredibly powerful, and in my mind, there was never like a go-to strategy for Zerg to deal with it. It was just constant aggression, and it was very tight. I liked it a lot. Hopefully, we're going to see that today because Hordeon has managed to surprise me with a lot of the tactics he's been doing. And speaking of a surprise, Hordeon is suiciding in a Overlord, and he's not going to see anything at all, which has got to be very discouraging to him. He's going to know that whatever is going on is probably going down in this natural, but he really doesn't. Oh, wow, just barely on the corner of his vision, just manages to grab that robotics facility. Wow, that is a huge lucky break for him because of the production of 3 gateways. He wouldn't know if he's going to be dealing with a 7-gate. Instead, with the robotics facility down, he's going to know that it's a little bit more of a long-term game, having to deal with, you know, those immortals later on, maybe a transition to Colossus, maybe a warp prism on the side, just to kind of harass at the further edges of his creep. Speaking of harassment, how many queens up does he have? 4? Okay, that's pretty good. He's going to have some nice creep spread because of that 4th queen, just a designated pooper. However, he's not going to have a lot of anti-air. He's not going to have a lot to deal with a warp prism if that does come into play. An immortal is on the production tab for StatiC, so it's looking more and more like it's going to be that immortal zealot sentry composition. With 2 sentries out right now, accumulating quite a lot of energy, they're going to be able to slice up any Zergling army that Hordeon can muster, but he has that Roach Warren up already, as well as the double Evo chambers being constructed in a very defensive location. So I think that that's more for the production of upgrades rather than, you know, where you normally see them up here in the natural, kind of choking off this run-by location. But you really don't have to worry too much about that with Protoss. What you do have to worry about with Protoss is this Observer. This Observer is seeing absolutely everything that Hordeon has managed to construct in his home base, with the exception of the 3rd, but he already knows about that. Switch over to the economic tab, 62 over 51 on 3 base. Zerg's economy is absolutely booming. The very, very late Overseer is coming out. Is too late to spot the Observer, which is already, if you check out the mini-map, is working his way up into the 3rd. Oh, but the Spore Crawler's detection. Oh, absolutely fantastic. And what is this? StatiC has moved out with his mainly Sentry army. He's really going to have a hard time with all these Zerglings. He needs to throw down his force fields. There they go. Very nice, stacking up all of those sentries and allowing his Immortal to kind of tank the force. Wow, really great play here. Force fielding the Immortal, and as soon as his shields were depleted, saving the Nexus from taking any hull damage. A really, really nice play by StatiC in a dicey spot, because you normally rely on your Zealots to slice up the Zerglings. You would normally rely on that +1 weapons from the Zealots to kind of make it so that the Zergling run-by is not nearly as dangerous as it would be, but we hadn't seen any Zealots. He was mass-producing those sentries, so that he'd have plenty of energy to throw down the force fields, but at the cost of some of the Zealots that you definitely need in that matchup. Here comes another little poke, but I think with the wall here kind of pseudo-constructed, you'd only need to throw down 3 force fields. Hordeon's really going to have to shy away from that, doesn't want to engage in that choke, wants a nice concave, so he is going to get pushed back, and unfortunately that's going to allow StatiC to secure this 3rd. Here comes the push once again from Hordeon. He's got a +1/+1 on the way, as well as the Glial Reconstitution, the speed for the Roaches. He's got to be very careful, though. He really doesn't want to push in and engage those dual Immortals, maybe sacrifice half of his force with some well-placed force fields coming out of StatiC. That would be a terrible play. We also have the Mothership Core on the production tab. Hordeon once again just poking in just to see, make sure that StatiC is playing honest, make sure StatiC doesn't pull back and try to protect his main base. But this is how StatiC is answering that. He's constructing a kind of pseudo wall off at the top of those destructible debris. There goes 4 really nicely placed force fields. However, the 4th one was too late to catch the majority of the Roaches, and man, this is the majority of Roaches. This is 32 Roaches. They're going to be pushing up, kind of poking at the pseudo wall off at the top of those destructible debris, but that pseudo wall off is buying enough time for StatiC to reposition with his Immortals, reposition with his Stalkers, and again, because of that choke, he has to pull back. Hordeon's playing this very cat and mouse, but Hordeon has the advantage because he's got 3 bases. The 3rd base for StatiC has not been saturated at all. StatiC is adding on a couple more gateways so he can spin down some of the excess money and, more important, excess gas. He needs to get out a lot more Zealots. He needs to get out a more intimidating ground force so that whenever Hordeon decides to push in, whenever Hordeon has enough of a brute force army that he can afford to engage in a choke, then StatiC needs to have a force more just powerful enough to deal with it. He's working on it, man. He's getting a Blink. He's getting up the Immortals. I would absolutely love, instead of Blink, to see Zealot charge, just because that unit composition works so very well together. But instead, I think he's going to be moving away from those Immortals, moving into the robotics bay. But I think he's underestimated just how much Hordeon wants this base dead. He is just sacrificing so many Roaches, pushing here. He's succeeded in taking out the 2 gateways on the bottom right-hand side. So many force fields have been thrown down, but there's so much energy left. But Hordeon, sacrificing at least half of his force, has managed to batter through so many force fields. But even with half of Hordeon's force cut to pieces by those force force fields, the other half is more than enough for the handful of Immortals and Sentries. They are going to fall completely. There goes the Photon Overcharge on top of the Nexus, but it is not enough to clean up all those roaches. It looks like the entire standing force for StatiC is going to go down. He's going to need to pull his probes away. Another Immortal is on the field, and another one is on the production tab going to be popping out, but that's not enough. Where are the gateway units? He's got the money. He just doesn't have the gas, and this is where Charge would have helped out StatiC quite a bit. This is exactly what I was talking about. He's got Blink going on. I guess Charge wouldn't have been done even if he had started it instead of Blink, but I would have loved to see this 1,000 minerals to have become 11 Zealots, and maybe this force would have engaged otherwise. Hordeon sacrificed his roaches by pushing up into that choke, knowing full well that they were going to get force fielded off right here, and because he had such a huge number of roaches, he just managed to battering ram just right down the throat of StatiC, losing the majority of those roaches, but at the same time dealing a death blow to the force of StatiC. StatiC only had a handful of stalkers caught down here in the choke, and then you can just see how many roaches were left over. At the end of it, Hordeon had enough of a brute force to deal a death blow to that third, and then StatiC was only going to be on one base in a relatively short amount of time with his main kind of sacrificed out. It was definitely a do-or-die moment. I think StatiC was just 1 or 2 seconds behind Hordeon. Hordeon making the correct decision to just kind of force his way into that engagement. It was nice. It was very tight. That's what I was talking about, is forces the engagement very, very tight, because there's, once the Immortal Sentry Zealot hybrid gets full steam, there's not a lot that Zerg can do about it to answer back. There's a little bit, but I think Hordeon handled it successfully. Yeah, that was a great replay. That's what I'm talking about, man. There's, I think there's 2 or 3 more, and so I'm going to go cast those. I will see you guys there. If you have a replay you want me to cast, you could PM me here or on Reddit. One way or another, I will see you guys later. I am Ibigandscary.